Welcome back to Life's Challenge. My name is Avital, and this week's Parsha is Parshat Va'era. And Parshat Va'era is a very cool and interesting Parsha because in Parshat Va'era, God decides that it is finally time for the Jewish people to go free, that they've endured enough, that He's heard their cries, and then He's going to free them from the land of Egypt. Now, the only problem here is Pharaoh and the Egyptians. And Pharaoh is a man who is, well, he's not stupid in the sense of he is seeing that these are all of his slaves and all of his workers. And when Moses and Aaron, when they approach Pharaoh and ask him to let the Jewish people go, obviously his answer is no. It's like, these are my workers. This is, I need them to be my slaves. You can't have them. And so that leads to the series of events known as the 10 plagues. And in this week's Parsha, we see 7 of the 10 plagues. And it's sort of this back and forth series where, Moses and Aaron go to Pharaoh and they say, let the Jewish people go. And Pharaoh says no. And they say, here's a plague. And then at times Pharaoh says, yes, the Jewish people can go, just make the plagues stop. And as soon as the plagues stop, Pharaoh changes his mind. And he's like, oh, the plague's over. You can't leave. And so that's sort of what we see in this week's Parsha. But something that stood out to me, and it surprised me because I had thought, oh, this was in last week's Parsha, but it actually is in both last week's Parsha and in this week's Parsha, is Moses talking about what we interpret to be his speech impediment, his heaviness of speech, or his heavy lips, basically, which again commentators have come to believe means that Moses had a speech impediment. And he talks about it in last week's Parsha, and I thought, again, issue resolved, but it came up again in this week's Parsha, and I want to go over it with you. So in last week's Parsha in Shemot, we see Moses, and here's what the verse says. Moses said to the Lord, I beseech you, O Lord, I am not a man of words, neither from yesterday, nor from the day before yesterday, nor from the time you have spoken to your servant. For I am heavy of mouth and heavy of tongue. And after this, God explains to Moses, he says, I made a whole video on this a couple years ago, but he says to Moses, am I not God who created man, who created mouth and the tongue and all these things? Like, I know that you have this speech impediment. I made you that way. And then God says, after Moses continues to be uncomfortable with the idea of speaking, this is what God tells to Moses. He says, is there not Aaron your brother, the Levite? I know that he will surely speak. And then it continues, saying, you shall speak to him, Aaron, and you shall put words into his mouth. And what they decide is that Aaron will speak to the people for Moses, that God's going to speak to Moses, that Moses is going to speak to Aaron, and that Aaron will speak to the people. And it seems like, okay, bada bing, bada boom, issue resolved. Moses had this issue, God came up with a solution, and we move on. But here we have it again in this week's Parsha, not once, but twice. Here's what it says. But Moses spoke before the Lord, saying, behold, the children of Israel did not hearken to me. How then will Pharaoh hearken to me, seeing I am of closed lips? So again, talking about this issue that he has with the inability, the difficulty of speech. And then, again, it comes up this second time. The Lord spoke to Moses, saying, I am the Lord. Speak to Pharaoh everything that I speak to you. But Moses said before the Lord, behold, I am of closed lips. So how will Pharaoh hearken to me? So Moses is really concerned. This is something that really troubles him, that he has a speech impediment, and how is it going to be that if the Jewish people don't listen to him, how will Pharaoh listen to him? He doesn't feel like he has the capability. And the Lord said to Moses, see, I have made you a lord over Pharaoh, and Aaron your brother will be your speaker. You shall speak all that I command you, and Aaron your brother shall speak to Pharaoh. And that's it. When you look at the rest of the 5 books of Moses, we don't see anything about Moses talking about his speech impediment, his heaviness of speech, his lips. We don't see any of that discussion again. So it's very interesting to me. Why does the Torah go through the detail of telling us all of this? So something that I thought was really cool is that Moses, again, is seen to be the greatest Jewish leader of all time, ever, since the creation of the world. And the Torah tells us that there never was anybody again like Moses. So Moses is this very esteemed figure. And yet, Moses was not perfect. Moses had a big insecurity is really what we are seeing here. Moses was really insecure about his ability to speak. He didn't have the confidence in his speech. He was very insecure, it made him very uncomfortable. And those are very human traits. In Judaism, our leaders are not the angels. We look up to these great people who have led us throughout time. And if you think about it in secular culture, in movies as an example, often we watch a movie and the hero is pretty perfect. They're attractive, they're self-confident, they're good with people, they are, just ruling the world. And here we see the greatest leader of all time, and he had insecurities, and he had self-doubt, and he had all of these things that all of us wrestle with too. And even though it was hard for Moses, with sort of God's help and with the help of Aaron, they were able to find workarounds. It didn't stop him from being seen as the greatest leader of all time. In fact, I think it only adds to it, because it's like, wow, here is the greatest leader of all time, and even he had insecurities, and even he had difficulties, and even he was not perfect. And I think that can be a really helpful thing for us when we're looking at our insecurities, not to let them stop us. We might want them to stop us. It is pretty clear from the text that Moses wanted sort of no part of this because he was uncomfortable. He was like, I can't talk, and so I don't want to talk. I don't want this role. And God was like, no, you're still going to have this role. We're just going to find a way to make it easier for you. And in our lives, we should not let our insecurities and our doubts and our difficulties stop us either. We may need help from other people, and that's totally okay. But we will keep going, and we should try to achieve those roles that were meant for us, because just like Moses, we all have our issues, but that didn't stop him, and it shouldn't stop us. I think that's a really powerful lesson we can learn from this week's Parsha. I wish you all a wonderful week and a Shabbat Shalom, and I look forward to speaking with you next time.